Good afternoon. My name is Cherry Wu, Senior Curator of Taipei Fine Arts Museum. It gives me a great joy to welcome you all this afternoon for the talk event in conjunction with the close of the exhibition Jiun in Taiwan Pavilion for Venice Biennale this year. For those who haven't been to the critically acclaimed exhibition, you might want to seize the opportunity to do so at the Palazzo Prigioni for the final few days. As our previous event, the entire talk will be filmed and made into a on-demand video up on our website at tfan.museum. However, for today, we'll also be giving the live streaming service in order to reach out for a larger worldwide audiences. This will go simultaneously through TFAN's YouTube channel, both in English and Chinese languages. Therefore, I would like to encourage everyone to keep your mobiles as private as possible during the session. Those who are interested in viewing these two documented events again, please contact the front desk for the links. Today's event marks the second part of the talk series, which is conceived to bring broader and more diverse discourse on Tehching Hsieh's aesthetics and his work. While the opening talk in May explored the art of existence, the closing talk today will focus on the notion of wasting time and traverse the proposition around time, labor, and waste inherent to Hsieh's epic work. We have the great. He is the anthropologist, the author of The Life of Lines, Being Alive, and other numerous influential publications. His interests are wide-ranging, and his scholarly approach is individualistic, pushing boundaries of various subjects between environment, language, technology, and skill practice, art and architecture, creativity, and human. Next, Bojana Kunst. She is a philosopher and contemporary art theorist, an author of Artists at Work. Her primary research interests concern the problem of the body in the contemporary performance, theater and dance, gender study, philosophy of the body, art and technology, art and science, and representation of contemporary identities. She is professor at the Institute for Applied Theatre Studies at University Gießen in Germany. Gong, he is a critic, curator, author of various publications on philosophy, aesthetic, and contemporary art. He is the translator of the Chinese language version of the book Out of Now. He is associate professor and the director of the doctoral program in art creation and theory of Tainan National University of the Arts in Taiwan. Joining them are the curator of the exhibition during time, Adrian Heathfield, who is an author and editor of many books on performance art, including Out of Now and Live Art and Performance. He is professor of performance and visual culture at the University of Roehampton, London, in UK. Last but not least, the artist himself, our one and only Tehching Hsieh. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our
Thanks so much, Jiun. As Jiun mentioned, this is the closing days of Doing Time. And it feels a little strange for us to be ending, perhaps even premature, given that the artist with whom we've been working made his mark in art and performance history by creating very long durational works, usually of a year in length. So we're having to make do with a 6-month exhibition. Seems somehow insufficient. But I very much hope that most of you will have seen Doing Time over this time, and our work here today collectively is to think through and discuss some of the resonances of Hsieh's oeuvre that the exhibition emits and amplifies. For me, as the curator of the exhibition, two important dimensions of Hsieh's work have been manifested by this exhibition, which is really the most comprehensive of his work to date. The first is really returning Hsieh to Taipei, to 1973, to recover the dynamics of his early works and discuss that little-known history in which we see the beginnings of kind of nascent development of his later, more mature works. But in particular, its argument with and its use of the earth and the ground, with all of the metaphoric resonances of homeland, particularly that entails. And also his investment in seriality and elemental conditions, which is there very early on, an interest in light, in water, in gravity, the accident. So that's the first dimension, which I think has really been opened. The second is really something that comes from putting these two one-year performances together, which is just feeling the scale and detail of the life investment that Tehching made. His sustained commitment to modelling and to modulating conditions of living, of existing or even of subsisting. And in those conditions, he's obviously subjected to various elemental extremities. And the exhibition, through the exhibition, I think we really feel and understand that he gives himself over to these conditions of vulnerability, insecurity and exposure. In a way, he becomes a kind of servant of certain rules and of certain powers. So I've been very struck seeing these two one-year performances together by the force of that aesthetic proposition, kind of selflessness, really, which is at the heart of all of this work, which it relentlessly pursues. That Tehching gives himself to so many years, in a way becoming a kind of experimental subject in extremity. So it's really a tremendous pleasure to have Tehching here from New York with us to close. And also, of course, to be joined by such inspiring guests in the shape of Tim, Bojana and Jiun. And their rich insights, I think, from philosophy and political theory, from art theory, from anthropology art, that this work really initiates in the 70s and 80s and very pressingly invokes. We called the session Wasting Time. It's actually, that phrase, wasting time, is a quotation of Tehching's, and in the fuller quotation what he says is that he was working hard to waste time. And so I guess it's that paradox that all of our thoughts will occupy in some way. Today, in terms of practical time, we're splitting the time. So in the first part, we are going to hear very briefly from Tehching on his thoughts in this moment. Then we'll hear from Biennale, from Jiun, and then from Tim. Then we're just going to take a break and have some refreshments for 15 or 20 minutes. And then we will come back for a much fuller conversation between you and us. And that reminds us, of course, that since we're live in all senses of the word, technological and fleshly, do turn off your mobile phones. And also, you realise also that as Tehching's English is a little less fluid than some of us, he will be listening to the talks and the first part of the conversation through Chinese translation. And just to say that we are also being live streamed with this. So in the conversation, it's really important for you to have your voice heard through the microphones, which are very handily, actually, everybody has a microphone installed in their seat. So it would be great later on if you want to use that. So we'll begin. Tehching, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. And my name is Tehching Hsieh, and before talk about my work, I want to say thank you so much for the Taiwan and Taipei Fine Art Museum give me this great opportunity to show my work in 57 Venice Biennale in 2017. Also, I want to thank you, the curator, Adrian Heathfield, to make this show have so wonderful quality. And today, it's my honor and with the good center and Biennale Kunst and Team Ingold and Jiun Gong to have a talk event. Thank you. Okay, so my work. Okay, I start to talk about doing time and still doing time. My proposed book is to show different perspective of thinking about the life, and this perspective all from the same precondition. Life is life sentence. Life is a passing time. Life is a free thinking. Okay, sorry. Okay. So the time clock piece, punch the time clock every hour on the hour for a year. I just waiting for next hour and produce nothing. And the outdoor piece, live in outdoor for a year, and I just walk and rest, eat, exclusive, and sleep without doing any work. So working hard to wasting time become the level of my work. Because when I say the working hard to wasting time, that's only existent in our time, and it's my concept of doing my artwork. And because most of my work, I don't do much, like a society called a label, so I'm just free thinking and passing time. So the way I say wasting time, because it's the people in society, the way it's thinking about the work. Okay, so to me, I want to, okay, the Sunday, well, this show, I don't call it retrospective, only a few pieces, because I have whole life work. Because my work is to do with time, and time is gone already in 1978 to 1999. So this period of time, my promoted work is already gone. So only a document left. But I don't want people to think about document. It's my work. So to me, I find a way to try to show my work in future and my life work. So I have a plan, and here I want to show, introduce what's plan for my retrospective. So to me, I try to make it like a 1 year time and transfer to 1 year, 1 year space, about 1,600 square feet, 40 by 40. So it's fit in the one piece document, most the big one. So each piece I will use the same size of 1,600 square feet. So each year, because 365 days, so the quantity is the same. So I transfer 1 year, become 1 year space. So this become like the first. Okay, here this become first piece is test piece. Second is time clock piece. Third is outdoor piece, and fourth is a low piece, and then fifth, 20 perform is no art. The last 13 years, and that I lay out to installation. And so here, let me just a second. So you can see, first piece, right? So all document, case piece and case will be in the center. So 365 days, in between each, and 365 days I call uptime. Then between each piece, like first piece and second piece become 193 days. So distance become different. And this called lifetime. And second piece, and then 366 days. Uptime and then lifetime. So that's where I lay out for people can take a walk to pass. So it doesn't matter, like I said, how much document or less document. Like the last two pieces, I almost empty. Like the time I spend it's the same. You know, the year is the same. So that is important for my concept to bring my, you know, the philosopher of thinking about the life. Doesn't matter, you know, to working hard to produce a lot of work or not working hard, just passing time. So to me, you know, the way I think it is like survival is work, and free thinking is work, heartbeat is work. So that's the way I you know, use this kind of concept in my my art time to you know, to develop my life work of thinking about the life and time and being. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Tehching. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Really like to thank you very much, Adrian and Jiun. It is really a great pleasure to be here at the closing of the exhibition. And thank you, Tehching Hsieh, very much for your work, which was really always a very inspiring and intriguing work for me when I was trying to think about art. I was, especially in the last decade or a bit more, very much interested in exploration of labor as a particular force laying at the interstice of relationship between art and life. And my interest is especially in how labor is also explored through emancipatory and radical avant-garde practices in the 20th century. I even think that it is impossible to reflect about radical and emancipatory practices of art and not at the same time address the issue of labor, this force so crucial for the whole modern production. Labor then the force we know around many contemporary social relations are built, and the force which is thoroughly determining the subjectivities and the experience of time and place in which we live. But it is also crucially related to the distribution of value today, to whom today the value belongs and who are more and more valueless subjects. Labor is also not only a central notion for capitalism and the ways how capitalism forms economic and social relations, but also lies in the core of the many artistic practices and their examination of artistic work and artistic subjectivity. And these practices are challenging the connections between productivity and labor, the effectiveness of labor, the illusion maybe of the absolute control of labor force and its total organization. I'm very much interested in the research of how in art practices labor is disclosed or is being seen as a kind of a negative excess. Not as something related to a product, but rather an abundance of waste, uselessness, the continuity of unproductiveness, the abundance of fruitlessness, a kind of unproductive burden. And this is not only related to the ways how artists are working, but rather to the ways how something like a work of art, but also life in general, could also be a life of the artist, comes to life. So labor is crucial for the understanding of becoming of life. Becoming of life in the sense of endless series of losses and repetitions. So life is paradoxically brought to life with a continuous maintenance, which cares for life entropy and decomposition. Entropy, the decay and decomposition of life, as we know, being the inseparable part of the exuberance of life. Now, in this sense, the explorations of the relationship between art and life, which are so characteristic for the works of performance and visual artworks, are always also explorations of productivity of labor and its relationship to the poetic dimension of art. Productivity is in many of those projects challenged to its opposite, the non-productivity. But, and this I think is essential, this is at the same time an impossible, paradoxical opposite. And somehow I would say even artists know very well that pure non-productivity is actually impossible. So this non-productivity is not really a negative or negation of labor, but it is rather shifting its burden, force, stamina, energy into something else. And I think that this we can see very well. With every project, the impossible dialectics was carefully examined and reduced to its minimum. Nevertheless, always with a kind of a surplus, with the abundance and exuberance of documents, ordering, witnesses, moments, traces, stories, rumors, even invisibilities. So maybe the work which came closest to it was your 13-year plan, the 13 years long absence, where you declared, I will make art in this time, will not show it publicly, but even here it was more as a paradoxical opposite. The absence got its echo in the artistic community, in the event it actually didn't, and yet it did happen. It happened in the duration of life, so absent and yet present, exactly through an absence of any documentation, of any traces. Only in your message afterwards on the sheet of paper, I kept myself alive. I passed the December 31st, 1999. So this shifting and of the dynamism and force of labor into something else, into its impossible opposite, is for me essential, also because it deeply challenges and undermines the role productivity has in the contemporary society. The role of the utterly destructive force of endless accumulation and progress, which at the same time also causes incredibly scarcity and destruction of natural and human sources and destroys life in any of its forms. This impossible opposite namely shows that the force of production is something else than aggregation and growth, and also something else than an endless abundance and accelerated dissemination of value. And here I would like to think about the force of production closer to becoming, to the ways how something appears or comes to life, how something, even better, how something maintains and holds through life. So in this sense, production can be thought in the proximity of duration. In this way, our perspective on labor can change, and something can be seen which stays often invisible when we think about the relationship between the labor and production in capitalism. There is actually a lot of labor in capitalism which is invisible, hidden. It is never evaluated or paid, but performed on a daily basis continuously. And this is the labor which has a lot to do with the reproduction of life. And the ones who were very aware of that were many feminist thinkers and artists in the 70s, especially the ones who tried to rethink the Marxist relationship between production and reproduction. Reproduction meaning here the labor which is needed to reproduce the life in general, like the labor of care, etc. So this labor was mostly the labor of women, which was always performed in invisibility and not recognized as the value-producing labor. And what those feminist thinkers enabled for the understanding of how contemporary production works was that they opened the insight into how capitalism not only manages to accumulate value because of an immense amount of non-paid labor, which is always continuing, but how accumulation of wealth, the acceleration of production, happens today because of the dispossession of exactly those sources enabling life. The accumulation of production goes hand in hand with an immense scarcity, like scarcity of life resources, etc. And I think that there is no coincidence that in the time when you, Tehching, did the performances, like your first performances in New York, also many female artists were exploring durational art practices through one-year performances, which were all dealing with the maintenance of life itself, but from the specific perspective, which treated the specific kind of labor women were doing in their life. So I would like to make here some impossible connections, or kind of provocative connections between these different works, which, due to their many differences, are nevertheless very interesting to be discussed together. In the same year, when your time clock piece was done, from 1978-79, Mierle Latimer-Nukeles, an American artist, did a one-year project Touch Sanitation, in which she was holding the hands of all the sanitary employees in New York City. And in this work, following the principle of her sanitation and maintenance manifesto, in which she declares the labor of maintenance and care for art. With this work, she was making visible the daily maintenance work the workers do in the city and the daily care of not leaving the city to its own decay, but also she was radically changing the position of her as an artist, becoming an employee of the New York Sanitation Department. Or a few years later, in '82, Mary Kelly did a conceptual work, Postpartum Documents, where she documented obsessively the birth and the 1 year after the birth of her kid, the kind of absent labor which usually does not have its place in art galleries. And even if these practices are different, especially in the sense how utterly isolated your figure is in your projects, how you practice solitude through the labor of care, I think there are also similarities between them existing. Because also your work, or you yourself, are actually not without the witnesses. And this is the family maybe of witnesses, friends, artistic community, which is caring about you, caring about yourself. I know I would need much more time to elaborate on that properly, but nevertheless I think it's interesting to go into that direction and find similarities in the ways how your work and the work of some female artists at that time, who were also addressing the issues of productivity, approach the issue of labor and productivity. Exactly through the exploration of the immense waste the documentation and the continuous attempt to organize at least a bit the endless entropy of life, but also through the care about life and its duration, the endless accumulation of repetitions, which paradoxically were at the same time repetitions in the process of becoming. So these artists with their work open this impossible opposite of productivity as something which was already always there, showing how the productivity which is not a capitalist productivity is already always existing. It exists actually in the core of capitalism and is not destructive as capitalist labor because it is continuously aware how destructive life itself can be. It is caring for this ongoing entropy of life. Such labor can maybe be properly named the labor of care, which can happen in many forms and which again, in your work, Tehching, I think is consciously and deliberately reduced to some minimal conditions. But even in its most minimal form, the care is there, because the labor of care is in its core related with survival, and they both together cannot be thought without the production of waste. In the caring for life, the waste is inevitable, because caring is continuously failing, it can never be completed, it is invisible and many times absent especially from what is present in the production of value, in what is today seen as labor and have a value. It is a continuation of rituals, repetitions, actions, body needs, which have to go on and go on again, fighting the entropy and the decay of life, and at the same time residing in the very middle of them. As you wrote on the paper, after the 13-year plan, I kept myself alive.
Thanks so much, Jiun.
I would like to thank Adrian's invitation here and for the long friendship with Tehching Hsieh during my translation of his book, Out of Time to Chinese. I remember in 2010 when I visited New York in Tehching's house. When I wake up in the morning, Tehching's always on his back in the darkness, and I will hear his voice. Very small voice. He said, "Jiun, where would you like to go today? Please take care of yourself. I will waste my time on my back." Every morning. Then after that, that's his wife get up and make the breakfast for us. Okay, so today I would like to talk about the doing time and the waste time of Tehching. Firstly, I would like to talk about maybe some geographic notion connecting with waste time. I would like to talk about the wasteland, but I think it's not a quite simple geographic notion, because Tehching was born in Taiwan in 1950, and during 1970s, it's a very special situation, especially international political situation for Taiwan. First, in 1971, Taiwanese government quit United Nations because it lost the representation of the One China seat in United Nations. So Taiwan was given up, but by United Nations. In 1972, Japan cut off the diplomatic relation with Taiwan. So again, Taiwan was given up by Japan. And that was Tehching's works began in 1973, as you see in this exhibition in Taiwan Pavilion. But everybody knows when Tehching jumped the ship in Philadelphia in the United States. And we must notice that in 1979, United States cut off the diplomatic relation with Taiwan. So I think something in the time logic was implicitly connected with the performance of the artist. So until now, Taiwan only have 20 foreign official formal diplomatic relation. So it's almost an orphan in the international society. So it's a repetition of the time that Taiwan was given up by other nations, by the international society. So I would begin with this kind of special experience. I would call it wasteland or the waste island. And the second point is that it is not only deserted by the international society. Taiwan was also deserted by Qing dynasty in 1895. So after 1895, Taiwan was sent to Japan and become the region of the Japanese colonization. So what can we learn from this kind of repetition of being given up, being deserted? I think it made us become very skeptical about the notion of modern nation. So why must we, or why do we necessarily join the international society become a problem, become a question? And the second one is that I think we can see the artist, Tehching Hsieh, he almost gave up every connection with modern nation, especially Taiwan. So when this time his work was exhibited in Taiwan Pavilion, it was a little bit embarrassed for Taiwanese government, because it is a re-beginning of the connection with the artist who jumped the ship in New York during 1970, after 40 years. So I would talk about the notion of a deserted island, because when we know the island was abandoned by politically by the international society, but in ecosystem, it was abundant, because 2 of the 3rd on the island was the mountain district, and they are full of different species of wild animal and plains. So it is not so strange that it comes out to such special artists like Tehching. I think it's an ecosystem very different, because such deserted islands, in the philosopher's words, the Deleuze, he said it becomes the island of imaginary, but not the actual island. It is the island of mythology, but not the geographical island. So I think in in the work of Tehching, he in his series work of a one-year performance, always he think about very different geographic notion when he use a different map to walk around the different corner of the New York, or he locked himself in the studio for the punch clock. I would make some comparison with this psychogeography thinking with Gould, the Glenn Gould. Gould, he used the north for a very different thinking with actual Canada. And the Japanese Buto dancer, Hijikata Tatsumi, he used Tohoku. It means the northeast. It is also a psychogeographical notion differentiated with thinking in Tokyo. So I think when an artist comes from abandoned islands like Taiwan, the different thinking of the geographic cartography will be a very imaginative and mythological thinking of his mapping during his work. So I think when I will draw back to the thinking of the time, because I think in this kind of thinking it hides with very different thinking of temporality. It's about the logic of the doing time or the West time. I think it's a logic of mythological recreation of the world from the deserted island. And this kind of a recreation gives way to the reconstitution of everyday bourgeoisie life from the reserve of the capital. So everything is taken from the ship. So like the Robinson on the deserted island, and nothing is invented. So it is all painstakingly applied on this island. So for Tehching's island, the waste island, the wasteland, time is nothing but the time necessary for capital to produce a benefit at the outcome of work. So he has recreate everything based on the reserve of the capital, of the capitalism, and he has to make re-beginning of everything based on this kind of reserve. So I think the doing time is a kind of repetition. So in the exhibition we can see the repetition of the photo, of the image, of the moving image. That is because his work is not creation, but recreation. It is not a beginning, but a re-beginning. And the second point is that on the deserted island, it is not an origin, and it is a second origin. Tehching must create his own origin, but he is not the citizen of the New York or of the United States during 1978 when he jumped ship. So he has to make a second origin by himself. And I think it's come from the time experience of a waste island like Taiwan. And under this kind of second origin, everything begins anew. And for the last point, I think this time logic is a logic about reappearance. It's a law of repetition. And the artist on this island, he must find something immemorial or something profound. Because this island may become a beginning of a mountain, and maybe on the island there is a mountain. It is an ancient small island. So I would like to share my idea about the Waste Island as the second origin of the waste time, and waste time is the second origin of the doing time. And this second origin make we experience Tehching's work in the logic of repetition. In this kind of repetition, we experience this difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everybody for allowing me to take part in this wonderful conversation. I only had the pleasure of meeting Tehching Hsieh about 2 hours ago, and before that I had been reading some of their work, including Adrian's book Out of Now and some other texts, and looking at some of the pictures, and this morning I went to see the exhibition. And there'd been one question at the top of my mind. Has this man got a sense of humor? Because I saw the pictures by the clock, and I saw somebody looking tired and miserable and sad and sleepy, and I saw pictures of a man in a cage looking tired and sad and miserable and sleepy with his head in his hands. I saw him roped up to a colleague looking a little bit fed up with this particular colleague that he was roped up to, and I was wondering, is there humor? Is there release? Is there a freedom of the spirit in this work? And I was very happy when I first met him. The first thing he did was greet me with the most radiant smile you can imagine. So clearly, it is possible and demonstrable that the kind of work that Tehching has been doing is also work that raises the human spirit, that does not suppress it, does not reduce us all to sullenness and misery and despair. And the question then is, how does it do it? How can work that imposes on oneself a regime that sometimes seems so constraining, so oppressive, how can it raise the human spirit? This seems to me to be the question in this work. When artists do this kind of thing, then they are often surrounded by legions of academics, of critics, of people who alight like mosquitoes upon the art world, intent on interpreting it for everybody else, and using their own expertise because the artist himself or herself refuses to do it. And the danger always in that kind of interpretative exercise, which I don't want to do, is that it makes it seem as though the artist is doing what he or she is doing in order to make a point, in order to deliver a critique of capitalism, or a critique of neoliberalism, or a critique of military oppression, and so on. No doubt, and in Tehching's case I am in no doubt, that a great unhappiness about the way in which the world is currently structured underlies the work. But if the point of a work is simply to deliver a critique, then the work itself becomes purely instrumental. it becomes a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And I would maintain that only work that is an end in itself has the potential to be transformative. Work that is merely instrumental can make its point, and other people may or may not listen, but it will not change the world. The only way to change the world in the long term is to do work that is valuable and meaningful because of what it is, and not because it stands for something else. So that's how I wanted to start thinking about this work. Not as instrumental work, perhaps as some kind of exemplary work. So now we've been encouraged to think about the concept of waste, and indeed many of the things that I would want to say about waste have been said already very eloquently by Bojana, and I wouldn't want to repeat them. But I might begin with a story from my own institution. I work in a university in the United Kingdom. Read, without the knowledge of any of us, that all waste bins were to be removed from offices of members of staff. On one morning, I and all my colleagues arrived to discover that there was no bin in which to throw any bits of paper, food residues, or anything else. We had to make alternative arrangements. Now, the reasoning behind this was that waste is a sign of inefficiency. Our principal wanted to ensure that we were efficient workers, and efficiency meant that we turned inputs into outputs. And since we were working in a university, these were knowledge products. So you turn knowledge inputs, in terms of data, papers you might read, into knowledge outputs, in terms of papers you then publish. And in an ideal world, this should happen without any waste at all. Now, what he didn't quite understand was that inefficiency is the essence of creative practice. That you ask any craftsperson, in whatever field they might work, in carpentry, pottery, blacksmithing, or whatever, any kind of working with materials involves the production of huge quantities of waste. Though waste, in inverted commas, because much of this, of course, can be reused in other kinds of ways. So the waste is only waste at that particular moment. So, and obviously when we talk about wasting time in ordinary vernacular usage, that notion of wasting time comes directly from the idea that time is money and wasting time is inefficient. In other words, it is intrinsically given a negative connotation. As I understand it, from looking at Tehching's work, what he is telling us is that if we have a different understanding of production, if we have a different understanding of time, then waste is not negative at all, it is positive. It's the very essence of creativity and of living a life. And Bojana already pointed to the different meanings of production. There's the idea of producing this or that, of producing particular objects, and the idea of producing in an intransitive sense, not of I'm producing this or that, but I am producing, I am living, I am working, I am laboring. And even Marx said what the producer produces is his or her own life. And the production of life has got nothing to do with commodities. It is simply about carrying on living, and that in itself is an intensely creative process. So I understand behind Tehching's maxim that what he does is work hard to waste time, is that he's working hard to live, and that living is the most important thing we do. Unless we live, then we can't create anything else. There has to be life. The production of life has, as it says, to come first. Gilles Deleuze, the philosopher, makes much the same point in his essay on immanent life. which he introduces with a wonderful story that actually comes from Charles Dickens, I think from the novel Our Mutual Friend. And it describes an incident in which a man in a boat has been driven over by a larger boat on the River Thames. And so his boat capsizes and the man in there is very close to drowning. And he's rescued by some people living nearby, and they bring him back to their house. This man is close to death, or maybe he might die, and they call the doctor. And the doctor arrives, and during this period, whilst the doctor is pronouncing, will he live, will he die, there is a hushed reverence in the room, a tremendous respect. Here is a question of life. Life or death? Will this man live or will he not? As it turned out, the man lived. And as it also turned out in the story, the man was a really nasty character. He had been a bad man, he had done lots of nasty things, nobody liked him. And as soon as he came round to some form of consciousness, he started being very bad immediately. And at once, that atmosphere of reverence vanished. And we were back to normal affairs again. And Deleuze uses this to make a distinction between what he calls a life and the life. A life meaning life itself. The life meaning the sort of life one might document by means of a curriculum vitae. That I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that, and I did that. So the life goes from A to B to C to D. But life itself always runs between, like a river running between its banks. We talk about crossing from one bank to another, but the river is not going from one bank to another. The river is always going in between. And I think that that is the kind of life that Tehching is exemplifying in his work. And yet it raises one problem for me. Because when Deleuze talks about immanent life and uses that story, it is very fragile. It is life that is on the borderline with death. It's life where you feel that only the tiniest thread, you hang in there. Living is like walking on cobwebs, very delicate, very treacherous, and it could easily go the wrong way. And so rather than life occupying a span between the moment you were born and the moment that you physiologically die, immanent life seems to be traversing a fine why the issue of appearance versus disappearance is so important to it, because that seems to be a motif that runs all the way through. And it's also there in the work that concentrates on the nature of surfaces. This goes back to some of those very early studies looking at splashes of tar on paving stones and the beautiful patterns that are created, to such a silly thing as to jump out of your second floor window and break your ankle on the hard paving stones. But what that brings out is the idea of an urban fabric that is hard, where the surfaces are absolutely hard. And the contrast between that sense of hard surfacing and our experience of life as something that is traversed on a surface that is actually very fragile. Now, are we going to think of the ground as something like a pavement, as something concrete? Or are we going to think of it as something very, very delicate and something that you have to really feel your way over? And I think it can be both. And in a big city like New York or any other metropolis, it is one thing for the ordinary people who live there, who drive their cars and live in their apartments, but it's another thing for humans who live outside that framework, and I would say also for the animals as well, who populate urban environments, who perhaps experience it in not such a different way, and where the boundary between what is above the ground and what is below the ground is not so obvious. not so hard, that it is the paving of the ground itself that has forced this division between the earth and the sky as though they have no contact with one another. And of course we can go back to the other earlier piece, which he then repeated in the film that you may have seen, of setting photographic sheets on the ground and then inverting them. That exactly turns that hard paved surface into something much more like an interface between the sky and the earth, which is very easily crossed. That brings me then to the question of freedom. I think these works are works about freedom, and Tehching says so in his writings or in the interviews that he's done with Adrian, that, for example, shutting yourself up in a cage for a year gives you the freedom to think. And as many of us know, we feel oppressed by our daily schedules, and we keep saying to ourselves, I have no time to think. I'm harried from one place to another. So that there is a certain freedom to let the mind wander, but it is a freedom of a certain kind. It's not the freedom of the economist who talks about freedom of choice. It's not the freedom that says we have all these different ends to which we can put to use our limited resources, and we must therefore choose them. It's rather a freedom to escape, to fly. The freedom I read once of somebody in a concentration camp watching a bird fly out into the sky and saying that is freedom. And it's not about a bird choosing that it's going to fly this way or that way, but simply the fact that the bird is able to fly. There's a fugitive quality about that kind of freedom, an escaping quality, but it's not escapism. It's not a kind of freedom that allows you to abstain from the world, to take yourself away from it. So the important thing is that that kind of freedom also, I think, implies a certain necessity. It's a necessity, however, again, of a different kind. It's not the necessity of some sort of predetermination, as would be externally imposed, for example, by the regimen of a clock or by a factory regime, but it is the necessity of paying attention to things, of watching the way things are going, of not actually being absent from the world, even though it seems as though you're inside yourself. So that those freedom and necessity then go together, and precisely because they go together, they are practices of care, as you pointed out. Tehching said, during those 13 years, I kept myself alive, but to keeping is caring. They're two sides of the same thing, and they involve precisely that necessity which goes along with that kind of freedom. And then the last thing I would like to say is about this question which has come up already. Are art and life inseparable? Can one or can one not make a distinction between lifetime and art time? And I was interested in this question because I was reading an interview between Adrian and Tehching that appears quite near the end of the book, Out of Now, in which they almost seem to disagree on this matter. Adrian says, surely, in your work, art and life truly come together. You're doing your art, and that is your life, and your life is inside your art, and your art is inside your life, and they're inseparable. And Tehching says, no, actually. I make this distinction, and you did it again today with diagrams. There are art time periods, and there are lifetime periods, and they alternate. I don't know exactly how to address this question, except that I feel that somehow both are true. That at one at the same time, art is life, at the same time art isn't life. And the reason, the reason art is life is fairly obvious. If you're going to keep yourself alive for a year in a cage, then that must be life. And if that's art, well, art and life are the same. The more tricky thing is in what sense is art not life? And I think the sense is this, that if all the world kept themselves in cages, or if all the world was getting up every hour to clock in the thing, the world wouldn't exactly work. In other words, what is being done in these performances is not exemplary in the sense that Tehching is telling us that we all ought to be doing this. He's actually doing something which is quite different, what he's really saying is that we all ought to be paying attention to what it means to do this and how it might be impacting on our lives. So that it's exemplary in one sense, but working by opposition in another. And so the art is life, yes, but it's not life in any sense of setting up a model for what all of us should do ourselves in life. And maybe that then accounts for something of the peculiar position of the artist in our contemporary society. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. It seems that some of Tehching's spirit is infecting us all, and everyone was absolutely on time. And so we have a break now, a perfect moment. And around 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll come back with tomorrow's discussion. So please join us for drinks in the foyer. Thank you. Maybe one place to start from you, perhaps more than an observation that might have a question grow out of it, was this very strong connection between Bojana's observations and Thames, but through quite different languages or vocabularies. We started off with this idea that Tehching was working hard to waste time. And Bojana really elaborated that as a kind of anti-productivity or non-productivity, but which she noted was a kind of impossible condition. And one of the wonderful things I think you said, Bojana, was that when you're engaged with that non-productivity, what happens is that the force that non-productivity shifts somewhere else, shifts into something else. That really made me think also of the futural dimension of this work, in the sense that, you see, one of the places that the force of that non-productivity goes is into us, into our bodies, the spectators, the observers of this work, the later witnesses of this work. But, of course, the real dimension of that is that it's belated, that it's happening much later on. It's perhaps not happening so much in the contemporary moment in which Tehching is making the work. And it was so fascinating that you identified that force, particularly in the 13-year plan. And this connects very strongly to something that Tim was talking about in terms of this non-productivity, or after Tim, what we might call something like a kind of, when you said, Tim, waste is positive. Maybe it's something like a negative affirmation, an affirmation of the negative. But Tim was pointing out that this affirmation of the negative is nearly always on the cusp of life and death. That there is a real question in that negative affirmation about the future of life. Actually, this relates very closely to the 13-year plan, because in the 13-year plan, at the end of Tehching's trajectory, what he says is that he is going to make art, but not show it publicly for those 13 years. So there's that declaration of productivity, but then withdrawing it from visibility. But in fact, what happened during that time was that he then made another proposition, which very much connects to Tim's point, which was that he said he would isolate himself entirely, that he would attempt to remove himself from all social contact. And he took a journey across the States, I think, heading into the wasteland. And in fact, so the story goes, he was only really brought back to sociality by a kind of crisis to do with life and death, and related, I think, to his family. So he was kind of found and came back. So this had a kind of impossible, it was an impossible project there. But I'm very interested in the idea that this condition, which Tim, you associated with the singularity of our life, as opposed to a biographical life, that it necessarily involves then some kind of anonymity. That to really be in that force of negative affirmation, in a sense, means that you are nameless, without a biography, or almost without a history. I don't know if that resonates.
Yes, it does. I think it depends a bit on what you do with names. Different people have different ways of using names. But if a name is treated as a mark of identification that attaches to you and nobody else, if it's something equivalent to an identity card in a modern society, then indeed to reach that state of immanent life is to become nameless and to become anonymous. But I just think that anonymity can mean, anonymity literally means no name, but it can mean different things in different societies. And I think anonymity has taken on a particular significance within our sort of late capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, which is connected with a sense of the uniqueness of the individual. be different from one to which we've become accustomed, the contemporary West.
Maybe I can raise some example that in traditional craft, there are many masters. They didn't use their name on the walls of the temple or the instrument they created. They just do it, and his principals, his students, their group, they will work in different ways of art, like the paintings, the architect. So they didn't use the name in very direct way, but they have a different group that for the patron they can choose. So this indirect way of using name, not on the work they do, but they use the name in the effect, the social effect. That's the traditional way in Taiwan. In Qing Dynasty, there are many masters, they are doing works like that.
I'm thinking about that question of name and so on, because what for me is also very interesting is impossible connectivity is that, and it's kind of a similar or lonely or solitude practices, that there are always other nameless names which are somehow connected to the practice of Tehching. And this is something for me why I wanted to talk about the labor of care, because there is something interesting in this push on the limit of this play between visibility and invisibility, absence and present and so on, but it is only possible because there is at least one existing who somehow is intervened in this network of care, whatever it is. And this is for me so fascinating in this work. And what is also very interesting is that, of course, Tehching knows much more, but for me, as I experience this work, this is a kind of invisible, nameless, nevertheless yet present network or a kind of community of people. It can be very small. It can also continuously change. And what is telling to us is, of course, that what we are also doing now here, it is absolutely coincidental. It could also not happen. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting also to think about that kind of futurity. There is a futurity in it, and I think this kind of a radical limitations of all conditions, but nevertheless, then production of the documents and so on, it is telling a lot about the futurity, but nevertheless, it has inside this kind of possibility that it could not happen because it was in this network of invisible care. I don't know. There is something very interesting in this question of name, how it's actually not so much about the name of the artist, but also about the namelessness of the artist, but also about the namelessness of environment. There is a question of environment also, people, places, and so on, in this sense.
I mean, that's very acute in the first 1 year performance, because of course when Tehching is imprisoned in the cage, he is reliant on his friend, who is the person who is actually in charge of the machine of visibility, right? Who is taking Tehching's daily photograph every day, but also importantly again in charge of the waste, of the shit and the piss. It's having to remove and extract that from the prison cell in order for the piece to keep its sustenance, which of course is it's so fascinating that you brought up the relation between the touch sanitation piece and this piece, which is the same year as the touch sanitation. But also, it seemed to me would then necessitate another kind of art history and another kind of performance history, right? Which is perhaps not so much thinking through the figure of the individual artist, but thinking about the collective, the structural collective network that facilitates all creation in some way. So every work is a kind of node in a web of relationalities that make it possible.
And that's exactly, maybe it's clear when it is so radical in a sense, not that we are talking about the isolation and the process of isolation, but it's exactly there because of this environment. I think that's for me so fascinating in this work. No? And it's even if I would just add something like now it came to my mind that actually through the work we could even observe how this, as you said in the beginning, the one who was included in the work was very present in the relation to care, how the work is sustained. But these people also disappear through the 13 years old project, but nevertheless it is there in the absence. And that's for me something very interesting to think about.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Please do, yes. But please, by the side of your chair there is a microphone.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here and to participate to this finissage. I do have some questions. It's really shocking that those acts and actions of a person would be considered art. I think we are going towards the direction of the Roman Empire, who invited the audience to enjoy the gladiators. I mean, the next step is to see people killing each other and being given to be eaten by beasts. I do have some questions for the artists. I didn't catch the pronunciation of your name, sir. Would you be so kind to repeat it?
It's Tehching Hsieh.
Tehching Hsieh, yeah. Tehching Hsieh.
Tehching Hsieh.
Yeah. Hsieh is like a Hsieh Stadium. Hsieh.
Nice to meet you. I'm Joe. I did have the pleasure to accompany Taiwanese guests in Venice. We talked a lot about being confined. Many communities had to suffer during Inquisition in Venice, and not only in Venice. And I think that what you did was insane. No way that could be considered. I didn't catch exactly if you were considered a refugee or an illegal immigrant, because there are two different statuses. Even in this situation, even if you are an immigrant, an illegal immigrant, I don't think that anyone in the United States of America would have left you in that situation. I mean, to break your knees, did you try, I don't know, to get another job during the time you were looking to recover your status as an artist? Did you talk to someone in the government? I realize that you probably were very angry that the United States of America is, if I understand correctly, I need to go back to that moment in history. I was very young then. I understand that the United States of America banned Taiwan, so probably your gesture was against this decision. It's a political gesture, not an artistic one. And nevertheless, you should have been treated with the respect which should be given to a human creature. It is insane what you did. And it gives examples to other people to solve in a very tragic...
Just wait a second. I think we got it.
You know, because to me, first I say, when I say one thing, right, you cannot just follow it completely. You have to think in the opposite direction to get the whole thing. I cannot listen translate myself. Because I said I'm speaking with, how come you cannot? Okay, I said, when I say one thing, you cannot just follow it completely. You have to think in the opposite direction to get the whole thing. So to me, you see, we're talking about wasting time, doing time, or talking about immigration, refugee, because when I answer you one way, then you have to think another way. So to me, it's like because it's a language limited, I only can say one thing, and you try to quickly to get another and then try to make it completely. That's why I just give you some signal to understand it. When you say refugee, and of course, I think I'm just illegal immigrant, right? I jumped the ship and then come in. But a refugee is more like a political mean. I don't think I have any reason for. I just want to illegal because I cannot get a green card in Taiwan in that time.
You were mistreated in Taiwan. Were you mistreated in Taiwan as a human being or as an artist or both?
Well, could I maybe we just move on the question, but can I just make perhaps an observation about it? Could I answer?
Sure, yeah.
Which is, you know, that part of your question, part of the numerous questions that you've asked, has a kind of tendency to pathologize Tehching, to say that were you mistreated, you know, this must come from, i.e., this must come from some kind of deep trauma. Or to say, in some way or another, that the work is not sane, i.e., to put it in the camp of irrationality and madness.
It's not healthy. This is what I want. I'm sorry.
Yes, but can I just finish the point I'm trying to make, which is that this gesture, this pathologization, is very common in relationship to this kind of work. And I note that in your question also that one of the things that you wanted to say was this is surely not art, right? So not only is it pathologizing with the artist, but it's also saying that what they have done, the time that they have invested in life as an artist, is not art, should not be art. So there is a kind of policing, really, of the border of valid and valuable art, as well as a valid and valuable artist inherent in your question. So I think this is a very important thing to say in response, because if art is anything for me, it would be the capacity to question what it is and what its boundaries are. And without perhaps this idea of a kind of healthy perspective on life. So that would be a little bit my answer, but perhaps there are other questions as well that people would like to. Yes, one here. You can pull any microphone, I think. They all eventually work. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Taiwanese, living and wasting time in Brussels. And I have to say, maybe echo to professors, but talking about lifetime and art time. The first time when I've heard about, in Taiwanese we say 谢德庆. I was 17, and well, he was not on our magazine papers. He was on the newspapers because he jumped illegally into the United States, and he caught by police in New York. And I was 17, so I didn't understand anything. And it took me 35 years to understand what he was doing and what he has been doing. And what I want to say is that his art time, the one-year performance in 1981, took me 5 years of my lifetime to meet his art time. And that's, I think, is the real essence of an artist. I'm not. I'm just a public. So I mean that we need this kind of artists to remind us that we are human beings, that the wasting time in this case will outcome the biologic time, because 1981 is already finished. That was 40 years ago. That due to what he has been doing this year, this one-year performance will be limited in his art time. That's my first my impression. I was really moved because I wait. So this is our first time that I came to his exhibition because, well, he takes 13 times, he's not doing anymore. So we came from Brussels to see that today. And it was just a happy accident that was this conference. And the second impression is that, well, actually there's a very beautiful French book, as a French novel, called The Possibility of an Island. Well, I'm a Taiwanese, so I'm from the same island as Mr. Hsieh. And well, it's echo, of course, the isolation or the no awareness of an island, surrounded by the ocean and so near to a terrible, whatever. But due to this, closeness by the ocean and no connection with, geographically speaking, not connected to a continent, that gives us the openness. The isolation echoes to this openness, which means that if he had been stayed in Taiwan, he won't become what he is. I'm sorry, probably. So he had to go to New York, but actually New York is somewhat an island compared to the rest of America. And look where we are today. Venice is and I'm so happy to see that the art time. That he's going to will be a project of space. So actually, all this, well, in my understanding, my little level of understanding as a public, that all this are connected together. So I think that's really opened my eyes to understand what he was doing when I heard him about him the first time when I was 17. And so I want to say that he take all his life to do this, and I spent all my life to understand. So we are equal, it's quite fair.
Adrian, do you want to say a little bit about the political context of the time? Because obviously one of the things is that in your talk, you are resonating these moments of exile, as it were, these particular moments when Tehching jumps, leaves one place and enters another, with a macro-political situation. Do you want to comment on that in relationship to the current reception of the exhibition, or even the possibilities of reception at the time in which the work was made?
I think there are two levels of politics in Taiwan during 1970s. For the first level is that the island was abandoned or deserted by the international society. That's the beginning with this action of abandonment. The second level is that they are the main train of the immigration from Taiwan to United States from 1970s, because it raises the like 1997 of Hong Kong. It's imagination of a catastrophe of the isolated from the international society. But for the cultural politics, it's a new opportunity and new dynamic that the artists of Taiwan are trying to escape from the island. So I think there are two kinds of politics. One is for the geographic politics that Taiwan was isolated from that time, but for the cultural politics, it is the opening, the internal dynamics of opening, escape from the island. So I think this maybe we can differentiate these two levels of politics first, and then we can understanding more. We can have more understanding about Tehching Hsieh. For me, he belongs to the cultural politics that many intellectual or students or artists, they try to immigrate from the island to the United States or the Europe. But in this kind of trend, I think Tehching Hsieh, he has testified a very radical gesture that jump ship in the United States. This is quite rare situation, and that's why the newspaper in 1970s in Taiwan are more apt to pathologize these artists. As I read the old newspaper, that all the news about Tehching Hsieh in his performance in New York was treated as some kind of sickness or some kind of mental illness or selfishness, so only few comments from his teacher or his master, his mentor in Taiwan that supported, that names this kind of performance as art. So it continued about 5 to 10 years. The newspaper in Taiwan continued to interpret his performance like some sickness. So the big politics were the Cold War structure and the suppression of the ideology, and the second level of the biopolitics and the cultural politics were very implicit. So I think it is the beginning of a life, and the beginning of a life usually have no name. So after 40 years, the life may got some name of itself.
I mean, what's interesting to me in that, as well as it being, we could map it in terms of something which is very culturally and politically specific, but there is also something else happening globally at that moment, because, for instance, when Tehching is doing what Tim described as ostensibly a silly thing to do, to jump out of a window, to make the fall your art, to make the encounter with the ground, the breaking of bones, your art. There is also another artist on the west coast of the States who is doing something quite similar, and that's Bastianada, who is making a series of filmed falls off of buildings into canals, etc. Though with a very different kind of aesthetic resonance. But what is interesting about both of them is that they are both, in a sense, exilic figures. They're both figures who are displaced or about to be displaced. And so a relation to ground, to the ground that you stand on is, of course, I guess, the question that is preoccupying you.
For me, yes, the problem of what the ground is a fascinating one anyway. We've done that. I've done that with my students on the beach in Aberdeen, where I live. And you can take students out and we stand on the beach and you say, you're surrounded by pebbles. These pebbles are lying on the ground, are they not? So we'll lift up all these pebbles. What do we find? More pebbles. Well, maybe they're on the ground. You lift some more up. And then you discover that there is no such thing as the ground. And the idea that there is a ground, universal ground upon which everything stands is an invention of modernity. And underlies the idea that by default the Earth is hard surface. That's where it becomes a rather fundamental idea to me. And there is a political dimension to it.
Epistemological.
And an epistemological one. And there's this wonderful work by, oh dear, names escape me, this wonderful German artist who bought an allotment in Berlin, covered it with motorway-grade asphalt. But before he did that, he planted some fungal spores on the ground, and then he built a shed in the corner and watched. And after a while, this heavy-duty asphalt that was meant for lorries began to develop into blocks, and then it burst, and the fungi came out, and he ate them and cooked them in his shed. And it's a wonderful sort of allegory of the triumph of life, of modernity's attempts to shut it down. And I think, in a way, Tehching's work is in the same way.
And we'd have time for the question over there, and then one here near the front. You have a microphone.
Hi, hello. First of all, let me thank you for this wonderful panel. I mean, it's a beautiful discussion. I'd have maybe more of a comment, or maybe it's also a bit of a question, and I would like to come back to some of the things that Bojana mentioned and that also Ingold mentioned, which is that, if I understand correctly, in the period of these 13 years, but also in the previous performances, the one-year performances, it was in fact that these performances were in fact not totally solitary, so to say, endeavors, but there were certain bystanders, certain, I don't know, a certain family context and all that. And I think that this, or what then Bojana called, so to say, an invisible, well, collective, so to say, or that is also part of the work. I think this changes a lot with respect to the notion of freedom that is involved here. Meaning that if I think about an artist, or very specifically in these performances, if I think about someone who's on its own, then the notion of freedom that might be attached to it is rather one of, say, freedom as self-identities, freedom as total independence from everything and everyone. And this is, of course, a certain very modern idea of freedom. And we might also say that it's an idea of freedom as the free individual. But if we think about the fact that there is actually a certain, let's say, assemblage or community of people involved that are invisible, then we're much closer to, like also in political terms, to, let's say, an anarchist position of freedom, or we're again very close, like on an ontological level, to Deleuze and to certain ideas of, let's say, multiplicity of agents being involved. So I think they're like really regarding, or like looking at these works, looking at these performances with the information in mind that it's not the only work of one person, but it's a work of, well, yeah, a certain community. That changes a lot with regard to this very central aspect of freedom, I think.
I guess one would say that that's always in tension with some kind of singularity of choice. Right? It is Tehching who decides to do this. Finally, it's also very interesting.
This is something I didn't understand. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. My feelings were very hard. I mean, we are supposed to take care of ourselves.
I'm sorry for the moment, because also there are many people who are listening, who are dependent on the microphones. So I just say that your question is, well, why did he decide to do this? Jiun, do you want to respond to that kind of question about why did you do this? It's a big question for anyone in relationship to any act, but Can you talk about some of your motivations in relationship to your work?
Really?
But I think, because I already said, one thing, but I have another opposite. That's always I do that. Because no art can be stay on life because the original is from life foundation. So to me, but of course I don't want to. Like I said, I don't want to say because, okay, would you,
We're going to go to an image which Tehching has on the computer.
Okay, like I say, slowly, the lives change, right? So to me, you see, first I believe doesn't matter. Pass that to that, up to you, or what I do. But of course, I know how come if I come here to wasting time, and also I enjoy wasting time with everybody. Because we must have something, we have a value, we want to, at least we agree the wasting time, the value, we can discuss it, even if everybody have different point of view, right? Different point, I'm not say how to passing time, or I don't say how to wasting time. I'm just passing time. But of course, I know myself. I still have a question myself. If I just say no, I'm not trying talking about how to passing time. Then how come how wasting time this word? Of course, I cannot answer myself just because people don't ask me that kind of difficult. But Adrian, you asking me about, to me, to do work or not do work, or in art time or life time, that doesn't matter. Because I already born, and I have to be passing time. And I don't want to be died, because I feel life is interesting, it's difficult. But if I want to say the word, cause art, of course, I know this game, we want to play this game, then we have to be something aesthetic. We want to...
Aesthetic?
Yeah, right, to talk about. Another way is, it's just to me, you see, even the Snoopy to the Charlie, what's his name? Charlie
Brown.
Yeah, he another 3 images sent, right? And then last one said it. Because this is aesthetic, you see. Another way, you can be all same direction, but of course we see through, we can laugh. But actually we are life so complicated, but actually it's similar. We try to change the world, but to me I don't believe change the world. But I understand it, if you are silent, just do our shit. Like I said, personal to public, I say, I don't really change it. But inside, I have my opinion. Private, I will decide which way is better. So to me, it's 矛盾怎么讲? Or paradox means that I don't think something like that, but another way, I personally have my own thing. Even before we're talking about, like I said, Tim mentioned about Adrian with me, we have different point of view about our life is similarity or is separate. But to me, if I say, well, actually, it's not different. But another way is different. So of course I have to be answered. And that's way why, because to me I believe I listen all everybody talking, and I know I don't because my mind is almost empty. I say empty is not like Buddha's kind of empty. It means that my mind because I don't know what I can say about words. Yes. But I I know is today, I do mention one word, label. This is my first time I use these words. Before I don't use words, but Biennale used the main subject. You see, so to me, I like a primitive way in isolation and do action doing time. In the way I understand it in political sense, many issues bring up. I know I can. Means I feel human do things. Until well, maybe I'm tired. But I still, this is my personal but another way, for example, if okay, I jump quickly because I'm little human. Means that okay, in my work, put the last two pieces in the front, beginning, and then after that, then we don't sit here. Nobody will come to talk about, you know what I mean? Because the order is different, must be, okay, you know, that each order must be followed up. If my front two pieces, and then even we don't have what's called a Western time or lazy eye or work and work, all become accessible, become wrong. And of course, you see, the last certain year, I try to do one piece, disappear, but I don't make no finish, no working. I become sad, I just stay alive, I survive alive. Because I know if I do disappear, maybe that certain year that because that becomes very difficult piece, you know, to disappear, to do that, to make the art game become working. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I say already. Yeah. But to me, I'm just saying I believe I say something, then after become lockdown, become almost look like deny. Look like I become lockdown. It's look at that way and then move forward. That's the way the rhythm. Oh, maybe one more thing I can read one more about why I use 1 year that, you know, I just want to say one more time. Okay, I want to talk about, okay, why I use 1 year, you know, the time. See, I want to talk about life and the intersection between life and universe. 1 year relative close to this intersection. For me, I think it's beautiful rhythm to art and life. It's a repetition, and it's also different. Every second, every hour is different. That's not going back. By paradox way, we are doing the same thing over and over again.
Thank you, Tehching. I'm sorry we were rude and we skipped your questions.
That's all right. First of all, thank you for the show. It's really inspiring to see it in one place. I'm from Hong Kong. Of course, Tehching's work is in the M+ collection. I remember how thrilled we were under Lars when the piece was acquired. And as I have a question for Mr. Hsieh, and that is, as an artist who famously did a work which was not to make work, I was surprised in the exhibition to see a recreation of the paper. I was wondering if you could talk about that, why you decided this was the right time to recreate a work that is already gone. And second, you know, aside from living, are you thinking of making new work?
Don't damage yourself.
No, I don't, you know. Well, because to me, if I have the way ending, you know, the way I don't do anymore, or the absolutely, you know, that's way to explanation. It's because it's not like an art form, it's an issue already. Become what my life to finish, and what since happened doesn't matter if art or not. But if that's interesting for communication, maybe people bring the discussion. But it's not about because I feel I use art that way to make it forward. I don't feel it's a good way for I'm not so good for that. But you asking me about something to do the time after later, right?
Yeah. So are you making new work and?
Well, it's okay, because I'm not thinking pharmacist. To me, it's issue. Even that can be tested. Say, okay, maybe this kind of ferments are. Because it's later, it's only this last 10 years, then I become, because my work in later 70, in the early 80s to most 4-5 pieces in that time. So I continue, even I have 13 years I don't publish, and then after that, 2000 until now I don't do art anymore. Already almost, like say 36 years old, I already almost just doing that. Doing that is doing art or doing government. But I'm saying, to me, it's that had to be, even I'm old, my age 67, but of course the concept is, if you are making right, if you have present time, and then you know how past and future. But if you stay in the old age, and then you become just past, and then you become, well, I would say was weak. Means that become like confused, you lose, right? So it's difficult for my age to keep. I'm still doing something in present time. Doesn't matter if art or not, but I understand time must be in present time, and to deal with past or deal with future. And I still have a someday to go, right? So I have to do something. Doesn't matter if it's called art or do something. Another way, I'm just passing time to until die.
Yeah. Actually, this question does come up a lot with Tehching, because obviously in the works there are these declarations and of the status of art, and I think also this conversation is. So one thing to say would be perhaps the declaration that Tehching makes in an artwork is different from something that you might say in life. That's one thing. So, the declaration where he says, "I am no longer an artist," comes at the end of the 13-year plan. I'm just doing life. I'm no longer an artist. There's photographic papers on the ground, exposed to the light and with water. This piece was something which we only had a description of. It emerged in a conversation with Tehching when we were making the book many years ago. And so that was its only existence, was really Tehching's description of it. And one of the questions for this question of whether in recovering that work, in a sense making it fuller, making it visibly present, making it into the archive, into a historical document with the help of Hugo Glendinning, who shot the film. This question of whether that was a new creation for Tehching, which in some way or another broke some kind of law of Tehching's, was not really the principal question, because in any case, I think Tehching had a very nuanced perspective on the status of everything he does with his archive now. Because we could equally say all exhibition is creation, really, right? In exhibiting, we rearrange, we reconstellate, we make new expressions out of artworks, we give new dimensions to artworks. But also Tehching, I think, invented this term, which I hadn't heard before, where he said, I asked him, what are you now when you're doing this? And he said, I am a sub-artist, which I thought was rather marvelous in relationship to the general condition of subjectivity in contemporary capitalism, which is really that we are all artists, and that he has invented a category somehow below that, where he is working in a sense to tend the archive, to take care of a history. And taking care of that history might involve reinventing it in some way or elaborating it in some way. Are there other questions?
There were 6 Belgians who jumped into the water at the beginning of the Biennale here in Venice. You know what happened?
Sorry, but
they were arrested. They received a fine.
You can't be heard by people. The audience for this conversation is much bigger than
I'm very
just
sorry.
here.
We shouldn't
but
let
please
this
use a
happen.
microphone if you'd like to contribute.
I'm sorry. I was saying that at the beginning of the Biennale, six Belgians, aged 23 to 26, I think, jumped at 6 in the morning from the bridge of the Constitution, which is the bridge Calatrava, by the way, made by a famous architect, Santiago Calatrava. They didn't damage themselves, but they could have damaged themselves. They could have damaged someone else, and the mayor of Venice declared publicly that he wanted to put them in prison, and of course they received a big fine. They were drunk, and they were naked, and they certainly weren't considered artists. I mean, this is not art. This is what I'm saying, to jump.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, if you're disqualifying this artist as being not art, I think
no, not the artist, not as a human being. No, certainly not. I'm saying that allowing an artist to damage himself and give an example to other people is extremely dangerous and shouldn't be considered art. This is what I'm saying.
Okay, but perhaps I'll just say one thing, which is that you might want to look at the history of art in relationship to the idea of interrogating and questioning and damaging and opening with the self. The history of art is related to this imperative. But do we have other questions? Yes.
I didn't know Mr. Hsieh before today when I arrived in Venice. I came here because my daughter would love to visit this exhibition. So, by accident, I visited the exhibition, and I would love to say that I'm impressed by congratulate the artist and the organizer for that. And the comments from the professors is very inspiring as well. So I have just a very short comment. The first one is to echo Professor Ingold wording. I didn't know doing time, wasting time today, because this is a new thing for me. But when I visited the exhibition, the first words came to my mind was spend and burn. So for me, Mr. Hsieh was spending his life, his time, and burning his life to create. And this touched me, this touched probably other people. So it's good. And my second comment, it goes to Professor Kunst's comments, is related to time. Today the human being is almost the master of the universe. The world or the earth. So when I wrote my message to the visitor book, I said that we are almost today the master of the earth, but we are becoming the slave of time. So because in the past we spent 90% of the human being was spending time to labor the earth, to plant, to create food, to produce food. And today we are, as a PhD, as a doctor, we are spending not our physical force, but our innovation, our idea to create value things. But more and more, we are becoming the slave of time. As Professor Ingold said, we have no time to spend, to waste. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are the slaves of time, and time has run out. So I'd like to thank you all for listening so attentively, and please talk some more with us in the foyer. We will be around, and also for coming to see the exhibition, and all of our fantastic guests for being here. Thank you so much.